If you're a regular watcher of the Young Turks and Rebel HQ, what used to be TYT Politics, what we've been doing on this channel for a while now, you'll know that money is at the root of influencing nearly every political decision made in our government due to the insane reality that we've allowed special interests and corporations to buy our elections. Our government officials are beholden to them chiefly and us second, a distant second. Even in the most extreme cases that involves the security of their constituents and the American people as a whole, even children. On the national level, there's no better example of that reality than gun control. Even after children were gunned down in Sandy Hook or in Parkland or in any of the other countless school shootings, and polling supports gun legislation, the government did nothing. Why? The gun lobby lines their campaign coffers, and that's more important than the children. And we have another more under the radar example of that, this time in regards to the latest Catholic Church scandal. For those of you who haven't read the news recently, here is an overview. A grand jury in Pennsylvania released a 1,300-page report Tuesday detailing allegations that the Roman Catholic Church spent decades covering up sexual abuse claims against 300 predator priests who are said to have targeted nearly 1,000 children. The report covers 70 years of alleged abuse and the lengths that church officials went to cover up the accusations, using what investigators described in the report as a playbook for concealing the truth. The report lays out what it said were mechanisms for shielding accused priests from legitimate punishment, including using euphemisms for the sexual assaults. Never say rape, say inappropriate contact or boundary issues. Choosing fellow clergy members, not unbiased professionals, to ask inadequate questions and then make credibility determinations about the colleagues with whom they live and work. For an appearance of integrity, send priests for evaluation at church-run psychiatric treatment centers, as the priest's diagnosis would be mostly based on his own self-reports, regardless of whether the priest had actually engaged in sexual contact with a child. Systemic corruption, covering up of child sexual abuse for decades. Systemically. After the Boston Globe report, I kind of thought that because the revelations were so damning and so sweeping that it was kind of the end of it. But then there's even more abuse. There's got to be more and more and more and more and more abuse throughout the entire world that we don't know about, beyond, of course, this Pennsylvania report. It's impossible to comprehend how many young children were abused by these sick priests and the sick organization that covered it up time and time and time and time again, and on purpose. It's hard to even put it into words. Outrage is a mild word for it, of course, and apparently that outrage is not shared by Republicans in Pennsylvania, or at least not enough for them to act. At the end of its devastating report finding that Roman Catholic bishops across Pennsylvania covered up decades of child sex abuse at the hands of priests involving more than 1,000 victims, the state grand jury drew lawmakers a roadmap towards justice. The latest grand jury report investigated 6 of the state's 8 Roman Catholic dioceses, including Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and Allentown. It ended by recommending that the legislature change the law to, among other things, create a 2-year window to allow for civil suits by older victims. While victims say the ability to sue could help them access services to cope with the trauma, lobbyists for the Catholic Church and the insurance industry have opposed such legislation, saying a flood of lawsuits would deliver a crushing financial blow. God forbid they're financially inconvenienced. God forbid, pun intended. Those two influential forces have found a receptive ear in Republicans who control the Senate. Led by President pro tempore Joe Scarnati, Republican, GOP senators gutted legislation in the 2015-2016 session that would have allowed older victims to sue, even if the statute of limitations had expired in their cases. As it stands, abuse victims can file civil claims only until they are 30. State records show that the Catholic Conference of Pennsylvania, the lobbying arm of the church, and the Insurance Federation of Pennsylvania have spent a combined $6.5 million to try to influence lawmakers since the start of 2016. It is not clear how much of that money went specifically to kill retroactivity measures because the state does not require lobbyists to release detailed breakdowns of their spending. Whew, so that's there's a lot to unpack here. I've read the Constitution. I know that there's supposed to be a separation between church and state. In fact, the church's tax-exempt status is contingent on them being separate from politics and the political realm. But here they are working with insurance companies. Jesus loved insurance companies, by the way, who are eager not to be forced to pay out the money to these victims, spending millions trying to influence politics, trying to influence the government so that they don't have to face significant consequences. Psst, Catholic Church, just because you're theoretically outside of the political realm doesn't necessarily mean you're outside of the legal one. So you're gonna get sued for a lot of money, and your attempts to buy off Republican politicians will only hamper that just a little bit. But that brings me to the corruption angle. Lobbying on the federal level and buying off elections has been such a success, so lucrative for corporations that they've begun doing it on the state level. And this story is an awful example of that. Now, insurance companies and the Catholic Church are working together to corrupt Pennsylvania's state government. Lovely, because God forbid the Catholic Church actually change itself as an institution and root out the pedophiles in their ranks instead of actively and enthusiastically working to keep them in their ranks. No, they'd rather buy off our politicians instead of doing that introspection and changing their organization. And the law allows for them to buy off our politicians. But this is what corruption is. It's not just Trump. It's not just Hillary Clinton. It's not just one face, one bad guy or lady. It's systemic. It's deeply rooted in our political system at this point, and it has been since starting in the 70s. And it has human consequences, life or death consequences, child safety consequences. It isn't just pay to play, wheeling and dealing by Wall Street executives or rich tech douches. Yes, that's bad, but it skates over the human cost of the corruption to just focus on that, because there is a human cost. That's why it's so damn important to get money out of politics and to elect people who will do that, because it's very significant for all of us, for our children. And the Republicans in Pennsylvania should be so ashamed of themselves for not acting immediately. And it seems as if they were acting in anticipation of this kind of result, and the Catholic Church knew these kinds of reports were coming. So who do they really represent, people of Pennsylvania? Because it's certainly not you, and it's not your children, and it's not the victims.